And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with the Honorable Gary Marr and Sandra Pupatello. Two-thirds of the panel. Joe Oliver is on a bit of a break. Sandra, you heard the rebuttal from Gary in terms of the carbon tax. And one of the things that he said, which, as a former MP myself, I can tell you, not everybody can change their behavior easily. They use their vehicle as a contractor in Muskoka. You use your pickup truck all the time to go hither and yon, 100 kilometers here, 200 kilometers there, just to earn a living. So they're not going to have very many choices except pay the additional tax. So
and that was the impetus for the heating oil change that the government made, because there were some regions of the country where the alternatives simply weren't there. And that will be the case with the carbon tax too. And Gary, to your point about driving, I do think there are areas where we're so used to a certain luxury lifestyle of every child picked up in an SUV in front of grade schools. Like in my hometown, you can't get around traffic around 3:00 in the afternoon because the cars are lined up with this pickup of one child by one mom by one SUV and backstopping all the traffic. And that's the way we live today. Probably evolved like that because it wasn't that expensive to do so. And maybe this will change their minds. Maybe there'll be carpooling where there never was before because gas will be more expensive. But ultimately, if what they tell us is true, those rebates are going to be hitting the people who really can't afford it the most. And those that can afford it, hopefully, will be influenced to look at how their behavior could change. Taxes do change behavior, both in companies and in your personal life.
Gary, are there any alternatives to get to net zero other than a carbon tax? Is there technology that can help us get there? What's your view from the oil patch?
Well, let me just say this about my prediction for what Sandra talks about.
Okay.
Is if everybody switched to an EV, then you just have big lineups of EVs picking up their kids at school. So I'm not sure.
95% of the energy is clean energy. That's the difference, right?
Yeah.
Well, except that, look at how EVs have grown. I mean, when 20 years ago, when you could buy a Prius, it was a tiny little car. Now you've got these gigantic SUVs that are run on batteries.
I wish what you would say would come to fruition, because the fact that EVs are not selling as fast as everyone predicted is causing a real problem for the auto industry, of which Ontario is directly affected. So, everybody go out and buy it, take them off the lot and get moving. But, that too will present its own challenge, because our grid system is going to have to be able to manage that. But I do think that no one's going to like a tax. And interestingly, we've all been in government before. We are never in the moment saying, wow, we are in a fantastic economy right now, and this is a good time for people to afford a new tax. That never happened in all my years of government. It only seems like, upon reflection, we'll say that in that era, they were doing very well, because in the era that we're in, it's never a good time to introduce a new cost to people.
Well, I tell you what, if you want an F-150 Lightning Ford, there's a lot full of used ones at a Ford dealership in Saskatchewan.
Well,
in the winter, in the winter, you don't get any range. You can't pull anything with it. There's range anxiety that people have.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
look,
Gary, that's a perfect example of how this fund and where this money goes is as critical to the discussion as we having to pay it. And that is going into innovation that will help companies create technology that makes our lives better, minus the carbon, because there's a lot of work still to be done on batteries. What that new next battery is going to be, many people are saying the jury's still out on that, because they are finding in Northern Ontario the actual work by those engines just isn't sufficient for how those trucks or cars need to be used.
Yeah, well, I agree with you on that. I mean, if you've got a second vehicle that's an EV and you're just using it to tool around in the city,
sure,
that's okay. That works. And if it makes you feel better, knock yourself out. But
I keep saying the plug-in EV is the answer. And I wish I could call up every OEM and say, please put that in your product lineup, because if people could afford a plug-in EV, they would plug in. And then in the off chance they run out of mileage going electric, then they can resort back to that gas engine that's also in that vehicle.
So Tony, this has been so interesting. I actually forgot what your question was.
So have I. But we were going to talk a little bit about technology and whether there's alternatives to the carbon tax. We're about 20 seconds before the break, so I might want to cut it off there rather than getting a partial answer. We can return to it, or we got to talk about the upcoming federal budget in any event, because that's on the horizon. And a little bit of anxiety I'm feeling right now vis-a-vis the recent Ontario budget. So let's get into that. We're going to take a brief break. We'll be back with our guests. Please stay with us.